They say you don't know what you've got until it's gone, but that's not true. Some people know exactly what they have. They just never believe they'll lose it. That's the avoidance curse. They push away the very thing they secretly crave. They think they're in control. They think love will wait for them while they run. But what happens when you finally stop waiting? When you stop chasing? When your silence becomes the loudest message they've ever heard? This video isn't about blame. It's about truth. The raw, uncomfortable truth of what avoidants go through when they lose the best thing they ever had. Not when you left, but when it finally hits them that you're not coming back. What if I told you that your absence does more than your presence ever could? That while you're healing, they're haunted. That the emotional shutdown they used to protect themselves is the very thing that destroys them after you're gone. If you've ever loved someone who couldn't love you back the way you deserved, this will speak to a part of you no one else has. If you've ever been made to feel like your presence was a burden when it was a gift, you're about to understand just how powerful you truly were. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you won't just see the avoidant differently. You'll see yourself differently, and you'll finally understand why they lost the one person they should have held onto, and why that loss will echo in them long after you've moved on. This is the part of the story they never get to tell, but you get to watch them live it. They don't lose you the day you walk away. They lose you the moment they realize you're not coming back. And that realization doesn't come right after the breakup. It doesn't happen while they're sitting in their pride, convincing themselves that they made the right choice. It doesn't even happen when they see you moving on. It happens when the silence finally catches up to them. When your absence becomes a mirror not of you, but of themselves. That's when it hits. Avoidants operate on emotional delay. At first they feel relief, space, control, freedom. They think, I've dodged the discomfort. I've escaped the intimacy I wasn't ready to face. But what they don't understand is that real loss isn't loud. It's quiet. It creeps in slowly, through empty nights, unreturned calls, and the sudden realization that no one understands them the way you did. Because what they're really missing isn't you. It's who they were becoming when they were with you. And that's what they'll never admit out loud. That when they left, they didn't just walk away from the relationship. They walked away from the only version of themselves that felt deeply connected, fully seen, emotionally open. You didn't just love them, you challenged them, you triggered growth, you held space for their fears. You believed in their soft parts when they tried to hide behind coldness. And they told themselves they needed distance, when what they really needed was courage. But courage is inconvenient, growth is uncomfortable, and so they chose comfort over connection. They let you go thinking they'd feel free. But that freedom quickly becomes a prison, one they built with their own hands, because once you're gone, they realize something terrifying. No one else makes them feel like you did. No one else holds up that same mirror. No one else dares to love them with that kind of depth. And now they're left trying to fill the space you used to occupy, with distractions, rebound flings, silence, ego. But nothing satisfies, nothing soothes, because you weren't just a person, you were an experience, a rare combination of understanding and presence that doesn't come around twice. They realize it too late, and that's the price they pay for running from love disguised as fear. The avoidant doesn't lose you when you leave. They lose you the day your silence becomes real. The day they realize you're not chasing them this time. That you've stopped explaining your worth. That you've stopped reminding them of your value. That's when the fantasy breaks. That's when the illusion of control shatters. And that's when the grief begins. Not just for losing you, but for losing the version of themselves they only met in your presence. They thought they'd feel lighter without you. Instead, they're left with a ghost, and no one teaches them how to grieve something they themselves destroyed. You were never the burden, you were the lesson, and now you're the one who got away, Let them sit with that. The truth is, they didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because you reflected back everything they weren't ready to face in themselves. You didn't just offer love, you offered depth. You didn't just give affection, you gave consistency. And that kind of emotional presence, it doesn't just feel good to someone with an avoidant attachment style. It feels threatening because real love requires exposure. It demands vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing avoidants have spent their entire lives trying to avoid. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection forces them to peel back the armor they've worn since childhood. And you, without even trying, were breaking that armor down. Every time you stayed calm during conflict, every time you asked what's really going on, instead of reacting in anger, every time you chose understanding instead of walking away, you were doing something radical. You were interrupting their emotional autopilot, and that terrified them, not because you were doing anything wrong, but because you were calling them out of hiding. Most people don't get this. They think the avoidant is cold, calculated, emotionless, but that's not the full story. The truth is, avoidants feel deeply, often too deeply, but they've built an identity around suppressing those emotions, controlling the narrative, protecting themselves at all costs. When they met you, they met someone who didn't play that game, someone who was emotionally available, honest, patient, and that presence didn't make them feel safe. It made them feel exposed. You weren't the danger, you were the mirror. And mirrors don't lie. You made them look at the parts of themselves they've tried to ignore, their fears, their emotional blockages, their self-doubt, their belief that they are unworthy of consistent love. You challenged the story they'd told themselves for years, that closeness leads to pain, that independence is safety, that needing someone is weakness. So when you came into their life, offering real connection, they had two choices: step into growth or retreat into comfort. And most of the time, the avoidant chooses comfort, not because they don't want love, but because love requires more than they believe they're capable of giving. But here's the irony: they will never forget you, because you didn't just leave a mark, you disrupted their pattern. And once a pattern is interrupted, it can't go back to working the same way. Even if they move on, even if they pretend you were just another chapter, your impact remains. Because no matter how far they run, they will never escape the fact that someone once saw them clearly and still chose to stay. You didn't hurt them. You triggered healing they weren't ready for. And now, every time they feel the emptiness you left behind, they'll be reminded not just of what they lost, but of who they could have become if they had stayed. The mirror didn't break them, it showed them the truth, and some truths come with a cost they thought you'd chase. That's the part that stings them the most. The avoidant convinces themselves that when they pull back, you'll lean in. When they disconnect, you'll fight harder, that you'll stay emotionally available while they withdraw, reappear, and test your patience again and again. Why? Because that's the dynamic they're used to. It's control masquerading as detachment. It gives them the illusion that they can keep love close enough to feel wanted but far enough to stay safe. And for a while, maybe you did chase. Maybe you tried to hold it all together. But then something inside you broke, and you stopped. And in that silence, they start to feel the burn, not right away, not while they're still convincing themselves that they made the right decision, not while they're scrolling through distractions or burying themselves in logic, but later, when their phone lights up and it's not you, when they come home and it's quiet but not peaceful, when their life keeps moving but emotionally they feel stuck. That's when the realization sets in. You're not coming back. And worse this time, you didn't even slam the door. You just stopped knocking. That's what haunts them, not the breakup, not the space, but the stillness of your absence. Because that's the moment they realize something they never saw coming. You were the grounding force. You were the emotional home they didn't know they had until they lost it. and now every connection after you feels like noise. Like static, like something is always missing. They try to replace you, sure, but you don't get replaced. You get compared to quietly, relentlessly, because you didn't just offer love. You offered emotional security, depth, presence, and when someone has tasted that kind of intimacy, they can't go back to surface level anything without feeling the emptiness more profoundly. It's not that they can't move on, it's that nothing feels the same, and here's what really happens. They start to search for you in others. They look for your softness in someone new's voice, your patience in their reactions, your emotional intelligence in their arguments. And it never matches, because those things aren't easily found, because what you gave wasn't performative, it was who you are. That's the part they never understood until it was too late. You weren't loving them to win them over. You were loving them because it's how you show up in the world. So now they live with the knowledge that they had something most people only dream of. Someone who saw their flaws and stayed. Who loved them through the storm. Who would have built something lasting with them, if only they had chosen courage over fear. But they didn't, and now they're left with fragments, reminders, echoes of a love that asked them to rise, and they weren't ready. You became their greatest what if. And that's not a wound that time can heal. That's a lesson they'll revisit every time they realize no one else ever felt like you.